Nobody told them it would feel like this. That is the first thing worth understanding about what the avoidant is currently living with. Because the avoidant who constructed a life around not needing, who built their entire psychological identity on the premise that people are ultimately optional, that solitude is a preference rather than a wound, that the self is most intact when it is most self-contained. That person had a very specific set of expectations about what your absence would feel like. They expected relief. They expected the particular quiet of a threat that has been removed. They expected the regulated, functional, manageable emotional landscape that always followed the creation of distance, the familiar feeling of a nervous system that has successfully protected itself from the thing it was afraid of and can now return to the baseline of careful, defended equilibrium. What they are experiencing instead is none of those things. What they are experiencing is something their entire psychology was constructed to prevent them from ever having to feel. And the preventing has failed so completely, so unexpectedly, so in defiance of everything the architecture was supposed to guarantee, that the avoidant is sitting in the middle of an internal landscape they don't recognize, don't have language for, and cannot navigate using any of the tools that have always been sufficient before. Your absence is not feeling like relief. It is feeling like subtraction, like something essential was removed from the composition of their daily experience, and what remains, while still functional, still organized, still capable of all the external markers of a life proceeding normally, is missing a frequency, a specific, irreplaceable frequency that your presence was producing, and that nothing in the newly quiet landscape is replicating or even approximating. The avoidant goes about their days. They complete their tasks. They engage with other people. They maintain the surface presentation of someone who is fine, which is the presentation they have been maintaining their entire adult life, and which they are extraordinarily skilled at sustaining regardless of what is happening beneath it. Beneath it, something is continuously, persistently, with a patience that defies every suppression strategy they deploy against it, looking for you. The looking is not always conscious. In fact, in the early stages of your absence, it is almost never conscious, because the avoidance system is still running the suppression architecture at full capacity, still directing the cognitive resources that would normally generate the conscious experience of missing toward other things, still maintaining the story that the distance is comfortable and the space is welcome, and the absence of the particular pressure that genuine intimacy always represented is a net positive in the ledger of their emotional life. The looking happens in the gaps, in the half second before full waking, when the suppression hasn't yet fully engaged for the day, and the mind drifts freely toward whatever it finds most significant. In those half seconds, it finds you, with a consistency and a specificity that the suppression cannot prevent, because suppression requires conscious maintenance, and consciousness hasn't fully arrived yet to do the maintaining. The avoidant wakes, and for a fraction of a moment, the mind is simply and honestly oriented toward you, toward your absence, toward the specific quality of what is missing, before the day's psychological management apparatus comes online and redirects it. Those half seconds are more honest than the entirety of the avoidance waking management. They are the nervous system speaking before the architecture has engaged to filter what it says, and what it says, every morning in the fraction of time before the defenses are in place, is the same thing, that you matter, that the absence of you is felt, that the managed distance and the constructed equilibrium and the performance of being fine are all exactly that, performance, and that beneath the performance something is continuously, unignorably oriented toward the place where you used to be. During the day, the looking takes different forms. It operates through what psychologists describe as attentional bias, the tendency of a mind that is preoccupied with something to find references to it everywhere, even in contexts that have no apparent connection to the original preoccupation. For the avoidant whose suppression is running against the full weight of your absence, this attentional bias surfaces in ways they find both confusing and irritating. A word used in conversation that you used, a quality of light at a particular time of day that was present during a specific time with you, a silence that has a texture similar to the silences that existed between you, the ones that were comfortable in a way that silences between the avoidant and other people rarely are, because you had developed together the specific kind of ease that allows silence to be shared rather than simply occurring simultaneously. Each of these encounters with the ambient evidence of your absence produces a small internal disruption, a flicker of something the avoidance system immediately moves to suppress, not successfully in the sense that the suppression prevents the feeling. It doesn't, but successfully enough that the feeling doesn't reach the level of full conscious acknowledgement. It surfaces briefly as a quality of distraction, as a moment of being less present to the current context than the current context requires, as the avoidant equivalent of missing a step, a small, surprising discontinuity in the otherwise smooth management of the interior landscape, followed quickly by the management reasserting itself and covering the gap. These moments accumulate. They are small individually. Collectively, across the full span of a day in which they occur repeatedly, they constitute a significant and ongoing expenditure of psychological energy. The energy of the suppression, managing each flicker, redirecting each moment of attentional drift, maintaining the architecture against the persistent pressure of an absence that keeps finding ways to make itself felt, despite every effort to keep it contained. The expenditure has consequences. And this is one of the aspects of the avoidance experience of your absence that is least visible from the outside, but most significant in terms of what it is actually doing to them. The psychological energy that is being consumed by the management of your absence is energy that would otherwise be available for other things, for genuine engagement with their work, their interests, the other relationships in their life, for the quality of presence that makes experience feel vivid and meaningful rather than merely occurring, for the particular kind of aliveness that the avoidant, like everyone else, requires in order to feel that the life they are living is actually theirs rather than a performance of a life they are watching from a slight remove. That quality of aliveness is diminished, not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself as loss or collapse, but measurably in the texture of how things feel. Food that is slightly less interesting than it was, music that lands with slightly less resonance, conversations that are technically engaging but leave the avoidant feeling in their aftermath, as though something that should have been transmitted between people didn't quite arrive. The world is going through its motions, and the avoidant is going through theirs, and the gap between motion and genuine felt experience has widened in a way that they can't source and can't close. The sourcing, if they allowed it, would be straightforward. The gap was created by your absence, by the removal of something that was contributing to the quality of their experience in ways they never consciously registered while it was happening, because to consciously register it would have required acknowledging a level of dependence on your presence that the architecture explicitly prohibited. The registration is happening now, in retrospect, through the method of subtraction, by experiencing what the contribution's removal feels like, by living in the version of their daily experience that exists without the frequency your presence was generating, and finding it, however functional and however apparently intact, subtly and persistently lesser. There is a specific phenomenon that begins to occur as the absence extends, as days become weeks, and the initial suppression starts to lose its grip on the material it has been working to contain. It is the phenomenon of intrusive recall. Memories of you, that arrive without invitation, without apparent trigger, in the middle of activities that have no connection to you, and that should, by the logic of the avoidance management system, be entirely free of your presence. They aren't free of it, because the memories weren't stored in a location that the management system can quarantine. They were encoded at the depth that genuine significance always reaches, woven into the general fabric of the avoidance experiential memory, rather than filed in a discrete location that can be avoided or suppressed, which means they are accessible from anywhere, retrievable by any number of indirect routes, capable of arriving in the middle of a meeting or a conversation, or an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon with a vividness and a specificity that the suppression cannot adequately prepare for because it doesn't know which route the memory will arrive by. The memories that arrive in this way have a particular quality. They are not the general, summary level memories that the management system most easily handles, the ones that can be noted and filed and moved past. They are specific, granular, the kind of memory that carries sensory detail, the particular quality of your voice at a specific moment, the specific warmth of a specific evening, the texture of what it felt like to be in your presence during a moment of genuine connection. These specific, sensory, granular memories are the hardest for the suppression to manage because they carry the full emotional weight of the original experience rather than a processed, summary version of it. They arrive with impact. They land with the felt intensity of something that happened recently, rather than the flattened quality that time usually produces in memories that have been adequately processed. The avoidant who encounters these memories finds themselves momentarily outside the management. In the gap between the memory's arrival and the suppression's response, they are simply in contact with the reality of what exists and what is missed. And in that gap, however brief, however quickly covered, they know, without ambiguity, without the architecture's filtering, without any of the rationalizations that make the distance feel chosen rather than costly, they know what your presence meant. They know what your absence costs. They know that the equilibrium they are maintaining is not the absence of feeling, but the management of feeling too significant to be allowed its full expression. The body knows before the mind admits. This is a principle that applies broadly to suppressed emotional experience, and it applies with particular force to the avoidance experience of your absence. Because the suppression architecture works primarily at the cognitive level. It operates on the thoughts and narratives and conscious interpretations of experience. It is less effective at the somatic level, at the level of the body's direct registration of emotional states that bypasses the cognitive processing entirely. The avoidance body is registering your absence in ways the mind is working to not register. Sleep disturbances, not necessarily dramatic insomnia, but the subtle alteration of sleep quality that occurs when the nervous system is processing something significant in the unconscious that the conscious mind is refusing to address during waking hours. A low-grade physical tension that the avoidant might attribute to work stress or general fatigue, but that has a different quality from those familiar physical states. Less located, more diffuse, the specific quality of a body that is carrying something unresolved. Changes in appetite, a slight reduction in the physical pleasure of activities that previously produced reliable enjoyment. The body withdrawing investment from experiences that the mind is still directing it toward, because the body's registration of the situation, that something significant is missing, is not aligned with the mind's management of the situation as acceptable and chosen. The avoidant, if they are paying attention to these somatic signals in the way that genuine self-awareness allows, and many avoidants, particularly those who have done some interior work, have developed some capacity for this, can find in their body an honesty that the cognitive architecture is working to suppress. The body is not managing the story. The body is simply living in the reality of the absence and reporting what that reality feels like at the most direct, unmediated level available. And what it reports, consistently, insistently, with the patient authority of a physical reality that cannot be argued with, is that the absence is not neutral, is not relief, is not the comfortable equilibrium that the avoidance narrative insists it should be. It is loss, registered in the body as loss, in the way the body registers all significant losses, with the specific physical signature of something having been removed that was contributing to the organism's sense of wholeness and is now, in its absence, producing the physical correlates of incompleteness. There is a point, and its timing varies enormously between individuals, from weeks to months to sometimes years, at which the suppression begins to fail in a more comprehensive way than the individual flickers and intrusive memories represent. It is the point at which the accumulated weight of all the small suppressions, all the redirected attentional drifts, all the managed intrusions and covered gaps, reaches a tipping point where the energy required to maintain the architecture exceeds the energy available to sustain it. The suppression doesn't fail dramatically. It doesn't collapse in a single moment of overwhelm. It fails gradually, like a structure that has been under load for too long. Small cracking sounds, barely noticeable individually, that collectively signal a failing integrity. When the suppression begins to fail in this more comprehensive way, what starts to come through is not a flood. The architecture rarely fails completely, but a seep, a persistent, slow, impossible to fully redirect seep of the emotional material that has been dammed. The avoidant finds themselves, in the ordinary course of their managed life, touching feelings that the architecture would previously have intercepted long before they reached conscious experience. A sadness that has no specific attributed object, but that the avoidant knows, at some level, they are not yet fully admitting, is exactly what it looks like. Grief. A longing that the management system tries to redirect toward generic objects, toward abstract desires for connection or peace or something unnamed, but that keeps resolving when the redirection falters into something more specific, into the shape of a particular absence, into the specific, irreplaceable quality of what was present when you were there. The longing, when it breaks through the management sufficiently to be felt with something approaching its actual intensity, has a quality that the avoidant has never experienced before and that they genuinely don't know what to do with. Because longing, genuine, felt longing for a specific person, is not an emotional state the avoidance regulatory system has ever had to process at full intensity. Previous longing was always intercepted early enough that it reached experience only in the attenuated form of vague dissatisfaction or abstract restlessness. This longing is not attenuated. It is specific and direct, and aimed precisely at the absence of you, and it carries within it all the emotional weight of everything that was real between you, all the genuine warmth and genuine understanding and genuine moments of arrival that the deactivating strategies were working against even while they were happening, and that the retrospective flattening of memory was supposed to reduce to a manageable size in the aftermath. The retrospective flattening has failed too. This is one of the more significant casualties of the suppression's general deterioration. The memories of what was genuinely good between you are not flat. They are vivid in the way that was described earlier, but more so, more complete, more felt, carrying more of the original emotional weight as the suppression loses its ability to keep them processed down to a manageable level. The avoidant is encountering in these memories the full reality of what existed between you. not the managed, reduced, fault-found version that the deactivating strategies produced during the relationship and the retrospective revision produced afterward. The actual thing, the specific quality of connection that was there in the specific moments where the defenses stepped back far enough to allow genuine arrival when you were present and they were present and something real was occurring between two people who, however complicated the context, were genuinely and specifically and irreplaceably significant to each other. Meeting that reality, the full, unmanaged, retrospectively honest reality of what existed between you, is, for the avoidant, a form of confrontation, not the aggressive external confrontation that the architecture always defended against, an internal one. The confrontation of the self with the truth of its own experience, without the buffering of the management system that has always stood between the avoidant and this particular truth. And what the confrontation reveals, in the specific, undeniable, bodily felt terms that only genuine contact with one's own suppressed experience can produce, is something the avoidant has been working very hard to not know, that they love you, not loved, in the past tense of a completed experience that can be filed and moved past. Love, present tense, ongoing, unresolved, alive in the interior of their experience with a persistence and a specificity that the passage of time and the deployment of every available suppression strategy has been entirely unable to diminish. The love was there during the relationship, beneath the deactivating strategies that were working to reduce its felt intensity. It is here now, in the absence, more accessible than it was during the relationship because the strategies that were running against it have finally, under the sustained pressure of your absence and the accumulated weight of your significance, begun to fail. The love and the absence are now occupying the same interior space at the same time, without the management separating them, without the architecture mediating the encounter between what is felt and what is missing, and the experience of loving someone who is absent, of carrying a specific, irreducible, present tense love for a specific person who is not there, is an experience that the avoidance psychology, in all its sophisticated, comprehensive, decades-refined preparation for exactly the kind of emotional pain it was designed to prevent, has absolutely no adequate response to. There is no deactivating strategy for love that has already been fully felt. The deactivating strategies work by intercepting feeling before it reaches the depth of full experience. They work upstream in the cognitive and narrative processing of the emotional material, reducing its significance before it reaches the level at which it would have to be genuinely reckoned with. But the avoidant has already reckoned with this, not intentionally, not willingly, not through any process they would have chosen, but through the gradual, inexorable failure of the suppression under the sustained pressure of your absence. The feeling has already arrived at full depth. The love has already been felt in the unmediated way that the architecture existed to prevent. And a feeling that has been fully felt cannot be unfelt through the same strategies that prevented it from being felt in the first place. The avoidant is, for the first time in their relational life, on the other side of the wall they built, not because they dismantled it, because the sustained weight of your absence dismantled it for them, in the slow, patient, irresistible way that sustained weight always eventually does what the architecture was claiming to prevent. The wall has come down, and what they are standing in, on the other side of it, is not the annihilation that the nervous system always promised exposure would produce. It is something entirely more ordinary and entirely more devastating. It is simply the truth of what they feel, unmediated, undistorted, not managed or rationed or kept at the careful distance where it couldn't become threatening, just present, just real, just the specific, complete, present tense reality of loving someone whose absence is now the central and unavoidable fact of their daily experience. What do they do with it? This is the question that the avoidant is now living inside, and it is a more complicated question than it might appear from the outside. Because the answer is not obviously reach out, repair, return, the answer is not obviously anything, because the avoidant is encountering, alongside the love and the loss, a secondary confrontation that is in some ways more difficult than the primary one. The confrontation with their own agency, with the recognition that the absence is not something that happened to them, that the distance was not the inevitable product of circumstances beyond their control, that the retreat, the cooling, the deactivating strategies, the management of your significance downward, these were responses produced by their own psychology, their own fear, their own architecture, and that the love they are now sitting with in the unmediated reality of its full felt intensity was present during the relationship, was there while the strategies were running against it, was real when the fault-finding was manufactured and the ambiguity was introduced and the intimacy was sabotaged at its moments of greatest genuineness. The love was always there, and they spent the relationship and the aftermath working against it, not consciously, not with malice, not with any intention to harm or to waste what was genuinely and specifically precious, but working against it nonetheless with the faithful, automatic efficiency of a system that was doing exactly what it was trained to do, at the cost of exactly what it has now cost. That recognition, sitting with the love and the loss and the knowledge of one's own role in producing the loss, is one of the most psychologically demanding experiences available to a human being. It requires holding genuine accountability without collapsing into the shame that makes accountability impossible to sustain. It requires feeling the grief of what was lost without redirecting it into self-punishment, which is just another form of the avoidance that produced the loss in the first place. It requires, in the most demanding sense, the willingness to remain present to the full complexity of one's own interior, the love and the fear and the grief and the accountability all coexisting, none of them canceling the others, all of them requiring to be held simultaneously, without the architecture mediating, and the management filtering, and the suppression keeping the most painful elements at a survivable distance. Some avoidants, arriving at this confrontation, reach out. And when they do, when the love and the loss and the accountability have reached sufficient weight to overcome the final layer of the architecture's resistance to external expression, what comes out is often the most honest communication the avoidant has ever produced in a relational context, not because they have become suddenly eloquent about their interior life, not because the words come easily, or the expression is complete, or the communication captures the full complexity of what has been lived through in the interior over the course of the absence, but because it is unmanaged, because the machinery that has always filtered what they say about what they feel has been sufficiently compromised by the weight of what has been accumulating that the filtering is no longer fully operational. What comes through the compromised filter is imperfect and incomplete, and probably doesn't say what they most need to say in the form that would most clearly say it. But it is genuine. It carries, beneath whatever words are used, the specific quality of someone speaking from actual interior reality, rather than from the managed presentation of interior reality that has characterized most of their relational communication. And that quality, the rawness, the specificity, the absence of the usual polished management, is, in its own way, more communicative than any more articulate expression would be. It says, in the most direct terms available to someone whose direct communication of interior experience is still developing, this is real. What I feel is real. Your absence has made it undeniable, and I am, in the only way I currently know how to, telling you so. Others don't reach out. They sit with the love and the loss and the confrontation, and they do not act on it externally. Either because the remaining architecture, however compromised, still generates enough resistance to external vulnerability that the reaching out cannot complete, or because the clarity that the absence has produced includes a recognition that reaching out in this form and at this stage of their own development would not produce what the reaching out is hoping to produce, that showing up with the feeling without having yet done the interior work that would allow them to show up differently than they showed up before would be asking you to absorb the weight of their breakthrough at the cost of your own carefully built equilibrium. This restraint, when it comes from genuine self-awareness rather than from continued avoidance, is, in its own way, a form of growth. It is the recognition that love expressed is not the same as love enacted, that the feeling being real does not automatically mean the expression of it is the right action, that you deserve more than someone arriving with a feeling they couldn't honor during the relationship and asking you to hold it for them now. This recognition, sitting alongside the love and the grief and the accountability, is one of the more quietly significant indicators of genuine development in the avoidant. The ability to hold a feeling without immediately acting on it in the direction that the feeling pulls, because the awareness of one's own current limitations makes the withholding, however painful, the more genuinely loving choice. What you need to know, wherever you are in your own process, is the reality of what is happening in them. Not because it changes what is right for you, not because the weight of their feeling in your absence creates an obligation to be available for the eventual expression of it, but because the narrative that tends to accompany these situations, the narrative that the avoidant is fine, that the distance was comfortable, that the absence is relief rather than loss, is false. And carrying a false narrative about what you meant to someone costs you something real. It costs you the accurate understanding of your own significance, the correct reading of what was real, the knowledge which you deserve to have, that the connection you felt was felt on both sides, not in the same form, not with the same accessibility, not with the same capacity for expression, but at the same depth of genuine significance. They feel your absence heavily, with a consistency and a specificity and a physical, somatic, architecturally compromising weight that defies every strategy their extraordinarily sophisticated psychology has deployed against it. The absence is not comfortable. The distance is not relief. The equilibrium they are performing is not the equilibrium they are experiencing. What they are experiencing is you, your absence, with the specific, detailed, present tense intensity of someone who spent the relationship working against the full felt weight of your significance and is now, in the unmediated reality that the absence has produced, feeling every gram of it. That is not nothing. That is, in the complete and honest accounting of what existed between you, the confirmation of everything you sensed and everything you felt and everything you invested in the reality of a connection that the avoidance architecture kept working to make feel uncertain. It was never uncertain, not at the level where the truth lives, not in the body that is registering your absence as loss, not in the mind that finds you in every gap the management leaves uncovered, not in the love that the suppression, after everything, has been unable to suppress. You were felt, completely, at every level that genuine significance reaches, and your absence is being felt with the same completeness in the specific, undeniable, architecture dismantling way that only the loss of something truly irreplaceable is capable of producing. They feel you, in the mornings, before the defense engages, in the gaps between the management, in the body that knows before the mind admits, in the love that arrived at full depth before the strategies could intercept it, and that is now, in the silence you left behind, the most present thing in a life that was supposed to be comfortable without you. It isn't comfortable. It is full of you. And the fullness, the specific, unignorable, everywhere present fullness of an absence that carries the complete weight of a significance that was never adequately honored while it was present, is the most honest thing the avoidant has felt in longer than they can remember. And honest, for the avoidant, is its own form of crisis, not because honesty is inherently destabilizing. For most people, genuine contact with their own emotional truth, however painful, carries a quality of relief alongside the difficulty. The relief of being in actual contact with oneself, rather than managing the distance between the self and its own experience. But the avoidant has spent so long with the management as the primary mode of interior life that the honesty, when it finally arrives in full, doesn't feel like relief. It feels like exposure, like being in a room without walls after a lifetime spent in a room with very thick ones. The same feeling that genuine intimacy always produced, the nakedness of being truly seen, except that the person doing the seeing is themselves. And themselves, it turns out, is the audience the avoidant has been least prepared to be honest with. The self-seeing that the absence has forced is comprehensive in a way that no previous introspective moment has been, because previous introspective moments were always conducted under the management, always mediated by the same architecture that was managing everything else, which meant they were introspective moments that found what the architecture permitted to be found and filed what the architecture needed filed, and ultimately arrived at conclusions that left the fundamental structure undisturbed, the insight that confirmed the existing narrative, the self-reflection that produced understanding without producing change, the avoidant who could describe their own patterns with considerable sophistication and then continue running them unchanged, because the description was happening at the cognitive level, where the management was still fully operational, rather than at the felt level, where the management has now comprehensively failed. This introspective moment is different. It is happening at the felt level. It is the avoidant sitting with the full, unmediated reality of their own interior, the love and the grief and the specific detailed knowledge of what was lost and why it was lost, without the architecture standing between them and the experience, translating it into something more manageable before it reaches full consciousness. They are in direct contact with themselves, perhaps for the first time in their adult life, and what they find there is not the controlled, self-sufficient, needing nothing person that the presentation has always insisted they are. What they find is someone who needed enormously, who has always needed enormously, whose need for genuine connection, for the specific quality of being known and accompanied and loved in the undefended places, has been present and pressing and entirely real for the whole duration of the life that was supposedly organized around not needing. The need didn't disappear because it was suppressed. It accumulated. It grew in the sealed interior of a psychology that refused to acknowledge it, with the particular persistence of things that are denied rather than addressed. And it is here now, in the absence you created by leaving, in the full and undeniable weight of a need that has finally broken through every layer of management to announce itself in terms that cannot be rationalized away. This is what the absence has done that nothing during the relationship could fully accomplish. It has made the need undeniable, not by removing the management. The management tried and kept trying and is trying still, but by creating the specific conditions under which the need became too large for even the most sophisticated suppression architecture to contain. The absence is the pressure that finally exceeded the architecture's load-bearing capacity. And the need that is now visible in the rubble of a structure that spent decades claiming to be impregnable is not a new need, it is the original need. The one that was present before the architecture was built. The one the architecture was built to protect. The one that is, in the deepest and most precise sense, the reason the architecture existed at all. Not to eliminate the need, but to protect it from the pain that previous attempts to meet it had always produced. The avoidant who arrives at this recognition, who sees, in the full felt reality of their own need finally surfacing, both the depth of the need and the history of how it was managed, is at a threshold that is unlike any they have previously encountered, because the recognition includes, inseparably, the understanding that the management failed at the precise task it was designed to accomplish. It was supposed to prevent the pain of genuine loss. It was supposed to ensure that the investment in any connection never reached the level at which its loss would produce real hurt. It was supposed to keep the avoidant safe from exactly the experience they are currently living in. It didn't. The investment reached that level anyway, below the surface of the management, in the genuine felt reality of the nervous system that was always encoding your significance, regardless of what the architecture was doing to minimize it. The loss is producing real hurt anyway, with a completeness and a specificity that no amount of prior management can retroactively reduce. The pain that the entire psychological structure was built to prevent is here, present, real, and more total than anything the avoidance managed relationships have previously produced, precisely because the management was so effective during the relationship that it prevented the gradual processing of feeling that would have distributed the weight more evenly across time. The pain that was spread across the relationship's duration for most people, the ordinary ongoing cost of genuine intimacy, the small vulnerabilities and small risks and small losses that come with the territory of caring, was suppressed and accumulated, and is now arriving all at once in the aftermath with the compressed force of everything that was kept from being felt at the time. This is the cost of the management. Not the absence of pain, which was what the management promised, but the deferral of it. The movement of the cost from a distributed, ongoing, manageable experience to a concentrated, retrospective, architecture dismantling one. The avoidant who managed successfully during the relationship is paying, in the aftermath, the full accumulated cost of the managing, with interest, with the additional weight of the grief for the loss compounded by the grief for the role they played in producing it, with the specific, merciless clarity of someone who can no longer attribute the outcome to anything external because the management has failed too completely to maintain the stories that made external attribution possible. And sitting in that cost, in the full weight of the deferred pain and the present grief and the undeniable need and the honest recognition of one's own role in all of it, the avoidant is doing something that their psychology has never previously required of them. They are being present to their own suffering without either managing it away or being destroyed by it. They are learning, in the hardest possible conditions, the thing that the original wound prevented them from ever being able to learn from a place of safety. That feelings, even feelings this large and this long deferred and this specifically painful, are survivable. That the interior, when finally fully entered, is not the annihilation the architecture always promised. That the need, finally acknowledged at its full depth, does not produce the collapse that the management was protecting against. It produces, instead, something that the avoidant has no prior framework for. The particular, difficult, genuinely transformative experience of being in honest contact with one's own emotional life and discovering that the contact is possible, that the self is capable of holding what it contains, that the walls were not, as they always claimed, the only thing standing between the avoidant and complete overwhelm. They were the thing standing between the avoidant and themselves. Your absence gave them that, not as a gift, not as a lesson you intended to teach, not as the product of any strategy or any intention, but as the simple, structural consequence of your genuine departure, creating the conditions that your presence, however extraordinary, could never fully create. Because your presence, however attuned and patient and steady, was still an external reality that the avoidance management could organize itself in relation to. Your absence removed the external reference point, left the avoidant with nothing to manage against except the interior itself, and the interior, finally given full attention without the distraction of an external relationship to navigate, has been producing, with the patient, unstoppable force of everything that was always there, the confrontation that the whole architecture was always ultimately inadequate to prevent. You are felt in the absence more completely than you are acknowledged in the presence. That is the specific, aching, absolutely real truth of what is happening in them. And the completeness of the feeling, the specific, present tense, architecture dismantling weight of it, is the thing that was always true about what you meant to them, finally arriving in the only form the avoidance psychology was ever going to permit it to fully arrive in. Not while you were there, after you left, not as acknowledgement, as loss, not as the love it always was, expressed cleanly in the relationship where it could have made a difference, as the love it always was, felt fully in the absence where it can finally no longer be denied. That is what your absence did. That is what it continues to do in every morning before the management engages, in every gap the suppression leaves uncovered. In every moment the body reports what the mind is still working to manage. It made the truth of what you were to them too present to suppress, and too specific to generalize, and too real to survive, without changing something fundamental about how they understand themselves and what they are capable of, and what the management, in all its sophisticated, lifelong, ultimately insufficient operation, actually cost them. The accounting is complete, the cost is known, and the knowing, however late, however privately, however unaccompanied by anything external that you may ever see or hear, is real. As real as the absence, as real as the love, as real as you.